we can introduce our experts who will be showing us a little bit about what they're researching and explaining to us what the literature is and just how our daily experiences are being studied. And then we'll, as panelists, have the opportunity to react to these. So it'll kind of be like a live back and forth, but first I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves and start off wherever they feel comfortable.
Go ahead,
I can go first. Sure. Hi guys, I'm Megan. So I'm a 4th year doctoral student and a clinical extern at the Seaver Autism Center. And I've been involved in various research projects looking at families, specifically siblings of kids with ASD, since I was an undergrad. And it's something I'm really passionate about. I really love talking to different Sibs and kind of looking into their needs and also kind of the strengths between kids with ASD and their siblings. So I'm really excited to share my research with you guys today.
Hi everyone, I'm Julie Wolf. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and an associate professor of clinical child psychology at Yale. I know Lauren, I work with Lauren, so good to see you here, Lauren. My primary role at Yale is doing diagnostic evaluations of kids with ASD, but I also have interests in social skills intervention and sibling support. Like many here, my interests and sort of my entire professional career path was driven by my own experience as a sibling. I have a brother on the spectrum as well, who's really just been kind of a huge inspiration in my life. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, and thank you guys so much for being here. I don't know if you have slides that you wanted to share or how you want to go about this, but you guys can go ahead and get started.
All right, great. Then I'll share my screen here. Give me one sec. The obligatory, can you all see this question? All right, great.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is just talk to you guys a little bit about mine and Julie's research out of the Yale Child Study Center, which we were looking at sibling relationships and the quality of the sibling relationship. So I'll talk a little bit about our research. And while I do that, Julie is going to help man the chat. So if any of you guys have questions come up while I'm going through this, feel free to put the question in the chat and Julie will kind of help me field those. And then if we want to discuss it more, once I'm all done, that's great too. We can kind of bring it to the panel discussion. But Julie and I were really interested in looking at parent-child agreement about the quality of the sibling relationship, which I'll get into a little bit more, but kind of how parents are saying the sibling relationship is when one kid has ASD, and then how the siblings themselves are saying the relationship is. So we wanted to look at parent-child agreement as well as specific positive and negative behaviors that we commonly see in sibling relationships when one child has ASD. So just to give a little bit of background about how Julie and I got interested in this topic and kind of what current research we have. So research is really limited. So I know that's something that we've talked about before in these webinars, is that there isn't a whole lot of research on siblings of kids with ASD. And the research that we do have has returned some really varied results. So sometimes we have studies that say that siblings are reporting overall satisfaction with the quality of their relationship with their sibling with ASD. So they report being really content and happy about various aspects of their relationship with their sibling on the spectrum. And overall, really positive long-term psychosocial outcomes. But we also see that there are these unique relationship obstacles and stressors that are specific to their siblings' disability, so that there are a lot of social deficits inherent to autism that can have an effect on the sibling relationship. So while siblings are reporting a lot of strengths about their relationship with their sibling, they're also reporting these really unique stressors and kind of their support needs. So that was kind of how Julie and I started thinking about this project. And so within the family, there's also often disagreement between parents and children concerning the nature and the quality of the sibling relationship. So sometimes when we have siblings saying that they're generally satisfied with the relationship, we see parents expressing a little bit more negativity about the sibling relationship and saying that they're concerned about either their typically developing sibling or their child with ASD and the quality of their interactions. So we thought it was important to kind of look into parent report to try to help inform parents about how siblings themselves are feeling about the relationship. So there's a lot of reasons that siblings are really important in autism research and hold a really unique role to kind of address some of those social deficits that we see a lot. So they hold a unique role as an early peer, presenting constant opportunities for social interaction. So this is like your live-in friend, right? Someone who's there all the time. And so for a kiddo who's having a lot of social deficits, having a sibling can be a huge strength for them and an advantage in practicing and learning some of those social interaction skills. In fact, research has shown that interactions with siblings promote social behavior, language and cognitive development, and understanding of others' emotions, which are all common deficits that we see in kids with ASD. This is particularly true when kids with ASD have an older, typically developing sibling, kind of someone to take the lead and show them how to do things. It can be a huge advantage for learning some of those skills. In addition, sibling relationships are the longest lasting of all immediate familial relationships. So this is a relationship that you're going to have, for the rest of your life. So it's important for us to understand that relationship and promote the well-being not only of the child with ASD, but of the sibling and their family as well. A lot of really positive outcomes are associated with a strong sibling relationship in general. So positive sibling relationships have been linked with increased social self-esteem, increased life satisfaction, and expressiveness in typically developing sibling pairs. So this kind of motivated us to have a better understanding of sibling pairs when one child does present with ASD and other kinds of social deficits. So just to go through a little bit, like I was saying, we see positives and challenges in the sibling relationship when one child has ASD. So oftentimes siblings show more pro-social and nurturing behaviors compared to children in typical sibling relationships. And when I say pro-social, I mean helping behaviors. So a lot of times offering more support and helping their sibling more so than you would see in a typical sibling interaction. Research has also shown that there's less sibling conflict, less quarreling, and less competition. So a lot of positive outcomes in the interactions between siblings when one child has ASD. Siblings, when I say siblings generally through the presentation, I mean the unaffected child. So when I say siblings, I mean the typically developing child, just on these slides. But siblings report greater pride and admiration for their brothers and sisters with ASD than you would see in a typically developing sibling pair. And in addition, many siblings of individuals with ASD report that they enjoy bonding with their brothers or sisters and anticipate really long-lasting, close relationships. So these are not relationships where we're seeing, a lot of negative reports about the sibling relationship. There's a lot of positives coming out of this. But like we were talking about, there's also kind of these unique stressors, right, to having a family member on the spectrum. So some of these challenges are that individuals with developmental disorders engage in less intimacy, nurturance, social initiation, so like starting a social conversation, and some of those helping behaviors we were talking about within the sibling relationship. So we know that's something that's inherent to autism, right? They have difficulties with these social interactions and initiating these pro-social behaviors, and that can carry over to the sibling relationship, which can definitely be a challenge for the typically developing sibling. We also see that social impairments consistent with ASD reduce reciprocity, so like back and forth in conversation, which results in kind of less warmth and closeness between the two sometimes. This decreased warmth and closeness may be especially present in sibling dyads where the child with ASD exhibits increased behavioral problems. So sometimes children with ASD present with various behavioral problems like aggression and kind of oppositionality, and that can kind of increase these problems with warmth and closeness. And then having a sibling with ASD tends to be accompanied by an increased level of responsibility within the family and potential exposure to negative behaviors. So sometimes siblings feel like they have an increased responsibility to help take care of their sibling with ASD, which we often see reported as a challenge. It's something that they're happy to help and they show these helping behaviors, but it can also be a challenge to feel like there's more responsibility there and can also be exposed to more negative behaviors in the home, like aggression or behavioral problems or things like that. So we're seeing kind of on both sides. So we see a lot of positives more so than in a typical sibling pair, but then also some unique challenges that are worth understanding and addressing. We also see differences in parent and child report. So like I mentioned earlier, there's kind of a discrepancy sometimes between parent and child report of the sibling relationship quality. So whereas siblings express general satisfaction with the quality of their relationship with their sibling with ASD, parents are sometimes less positive about the sibling dynamic between their children, which can lead to stress at home. So parents feeling like they're not sure how their children are getting along or worried about their interactions can definitely create more parental stress and impact the whole family. They also may overestimate their typically developing child's knowledge and understanding of the impact of ASD. So they may assume that their child understands what's happening in terms of like what to expect from their child with ASD and be worried about how they're going to react. So a lot of parents' report can sometimes be different than child report. And so that kind of leads into some of our research questions. So we thought it's really important to do this research in order to kind of not only promote the well-being of siblings, but also of families in general, to kind of help parents understand that there are a lot of positives in these sibling relationships. So we aim to look at parent versus child report of both positive and negative behaviors exhibited by siblings and their brothers or sisters with ASD within the sibling dyad or pair. So kind of looking at specifically the positive and the negative behaviors that both siblings are bringing to the table. We also wanted to look at parent-child disagreement regarding the quality of the sibling relationship to kind of inform how we can talk to parents about how Sibs are feeling about the sibling relationship. So to answer this question, this happened across 2 sites. So our participants who were siblings came from social support groups that Julie and some of our colleagues were running at the Virginia Tech Center for Autism Research, and then Julie at the Yale Child Study Center. And so we had 37 typically developing children who have at least one sibling with ASD, and then one parent of each sibling complete this questionnaire to help us better understand the sibling relationship. So the sibling relationship questionnaire was administered to each sibling and their parent to assess the positivity and negativity within the sibling relationship. So this questionnaire kind of has 2 different domains. So it looked at positive aspects of the sibling relationship, so kind of warmth and support, and had questions about showing care, acting lovingly, showing appreciation, helping, other kinds of positive behaviors within the sibling pair. And then it also looked at negativity in the relationship, which is kind of more hostility and coercion, and asked questions about getting angry, yelling, arguing, physical aggression, like hitting, pushing, and grabbing, to kind of get a better picture of specifically what behaviors are going on, as well as kind of satisfaction with the sibling relationship. So now to go through a little bit what we found. So siblings reported more positive and fewer negative behaviors within the sibling relationship than did parents. So siblings, based on their report, were saying there are a lot of positive behaviors here and not as many negative behaviors compared to what the parents were reporting about their own kids' interactions. The siblings also reported more positive behaviors than negative behaviors within the relationship. So Sibs were saying, listen, within this relationship, there's more positive here than there is negative, which is not the same as what the parents were saying, which was really interesting. The siblings also exhibited more positive than negative behaviors within the relationship. So more positive behaviors than their brother or sister with ASD. So basically they rated their own behaviors and then their siblings' behavior. So this was basically saying, yes, I engage in some more of those helping and supporting behaviors than my sibling with ASD does, which is consistent with the diagnosis and kind of the prior research that we were looking at, that sometimes the sibling with ASD needs more help and support. But we do see that siblings are engaging in these positive behaviors more so than negative behaviors, mostly in domains of help and support. So while we might see kind of added stressors and challenges to having a sibling with ASD, we still see siblings reporting that they're engaging in these domains of help and support. Siblings also reported increased demand for sibling help and support for their brother or sister with ASD, but also increased appreciation for their brother or sisters. So there is that added kind of adversity that may come from these challenges, but they reported more appreciation for their brothers or sisters, kind of showing the resilience of siblings in their sibling relationship. One important finding that we had, this last one, is that children with ASD were reported to exhibit more aggressive behaviors within the sibling relationship than were typically developing siblings. So Sibs were the victim of aggression more so than the other way around. So we thought it was important to talk a little bit about what to do as a sibling if you are experiencing aggression, because this is a common problem that we saw in our data. So a little bit about what does this mean for siblings and parents. So like we said, social deficits associated with autism may impact the sibling relationship. So we did see that Sibs were engaging in more helping and more support, which is probably because their sibling with a disability needs more help and support at home. So this is definitely something that impacts the sibling relationship. However, siblings may be viewing their sibling relationships as more normative, and knowledge of this is something that could be really reassuring to help alleviate stress among parents who have concerns about the quality of the relationship between their children. And mostly that siblings are resilient and amazing and thankful for their relationships with their brothers and sisters, despite any added adversity or responsibility that they report. And yeah, the last thing we wanted to go over was just kind of some concrete strategies for managing aggression. And so if this is something that you guys have experienced or are experiencing, or parents, if it's something you want to talk to your children about, we want to be able to give you guys just some strategies for what to do if this happens at home. And our biggest takeaway is just don't try to manage this on your own. And like we can see, siblings engage in a lot of helping and supporting behavior, but this is a behavior that it's kind of important to have the whole team in on. Don't fight back, because we want to make sure that we're not escalating the fighting. We're kind of trying to de-escalate that, and we don't want it to get worse or more intense. And then make sure that you notify an adult. So have an adult at home that you trust and can tell them about what's going on and kind of your concerns, as well as having a designated safe space to go until the aggression has resolved. So if you can, go to your bedroom and take a break, if that's something you need to do until the situation kind of de-escalates, and then, go and talk to an adult that you trust about what's going on. Okay, so what I want to do is kind of bring all this to a panel discussion now, and we're happy to field any questions, and then I'm excited to hear everyone's reactions. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Actually, if you wanted to leave that screen on for a little bit, or just put them in the chat, that one panel that you had that had all those different findings from there, I think that would be really helpful to kind of
absolutely
have up for our discussion.
Right, this one?
Yeah, okay. I
Okay.
think this one has a lot of the points that we're going to be able to talk about in different settings and things like that, and we can almost take them one by one, I would say.
Awesome.
So unless anyone has super strong feelings of a place where to start, I'm just going to start on this light blue box on the left there. Sorry for anyone that's colorblind, it looks light blue to me. So it's the one that says siblings reported more positive and fewer negative behaviors within the sibling relationship than did parents. So this to me is one of the most interesting points of all of it, because most of us are just born into this, unless your sibling is a really big age difference away from you, your whole life has been formatted into the autism spectrum, And so I think that's a little bit about what Megan was saying at the end there of this is how we normalize things. And our parents had a whole life before we were born, And so for them, it's so much time of adjusting their expectations of what childhood is supposed to look like, because unless they were also a sibling, they're not going to know how that works. And they're not going to know how we best cope with things. Meanwhile, for us, it's the only thing I've ever known. But yeah, if anyone else had feelings about that, I'd love to hear if your experiences were the same. Yeah, go for it. We'll go to Evie and then Amanda.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it's funny like that parents like report more of the negative behaviors. I guess in my mind, it just reminds me of like when I fight with my brother, which happens, every so often, like over the dishes, whatever, whatnot. Like we fight and then we move on. Like, and it's just that's whatever. It's just what siblings do. Versus my parents might look at it as more as like, okay, they fought this time and then this time versus we just immediately forget and then the next day we'll like be watching a movie together. So I think it's just a difference in how like we interpret like the negative behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thinking of from like the parent perspective in that case as well, I know that my mom's on like hyper alert because she wants so badly for our relationship to be like a brilliant one, which albeit it is, but even my relationship with my parents, I have to fight with them every now and then. I mean, not everything can be like sunshine and rainbows. But Amanda, please chip in.
Similarly to what you guys are saying, I'd be interested because my mother, she has siblings, and so she's always said like, I think it's that feeling of like almost like a loss on our part, like that we are missing something, like there's something that we don't have, but like because this is a topic of conversation we actually discussed a couple weeks ago, and she said to me that she was like, well, my brothers were always like, I knew I had them, in my corner if anything were to happen, and when we think of like aging parents and, like that kind of feelings of anxiousness that come with getting older, it's like, who's going to help you, like and I'm like, well, that I'm not even there, like, but thank you. But it's like that feeling of not having that partner, but we do in a different way. And, so I think that's interesting. It's an interesting, that parents are so, because we're like you said, Sam, it's like we've grown up with, this is our life, this is how our relationship, and it's normal for us, but it's hard to remember that for our parents, it like probably isn't typical for them. So I think that's interesting.
I think it's so hard to remember that our parents are people too, like our parents existed long, like they had whole lives before I was even a thought, and so to remember that this is like, they're just humans that have to deal with like watching this totally different relationship as well. Like they had so much more adjustment to do than I did. Like I was born with like this huge plus of just understanding that this is what my brother is. Like we just recently, so I'm in this class on autism spectrum disorder. For the first time in my life, I'm taking a class on it, which is crazy considering I'm 21. But we just watched Rain Man for our class. Now, I don't know if anyone else has seen this, but it made me cry, first of all. Second of all, it was so funny because there's like certain moments, like when he was talking to a doctor for the first time and the doctor was like, oh, so you're saying he's artistic? And I was like, haha, that had happened every day for like when I was a kid and trying to explain this case to people. And I just thought that it was this really funny thing. Meanwhile, it's my parents, it's like potentially scarring for them, for people to like not understand. And meanwhile, I'm like, that's cute. But yeah, so if we want to move on to the next one, because we have like almost half of our time left, thank goodness. So next is we as siblings, are reporting more positive behaviors than negative behaviors within the relationship. I think pulling off of exactly what we've been saying is like, it's what Evie said about our perception of what's happening is probably very different from like an outside perception, because like, let's be honest, if my brother comes over and gives me a hug, like it might start snowing in the summer. That's not really something that I'm expecting, Whereas in other people, the lack of that like constant physical support could be perceived as like this negative thing. Whereas to me, it's like, nah, we just kind of vibe on a different level, If anyone else wants to hop in on that too.
Yeah, I can say something on that. I guess back to your point about it being like normal to us and, our parents' perspective is something different. Also, I know both my parents are in here right now, so I gotta be careful what I say, but, but yeah, like, I think for me, it was a gradual realization that Charles was different than I am, it took a while for me to realize that we were different in the first place. And there was one anecdote my mom was telling me that I saw my friends' brothers like play fighting or wrestling or whatever. And I kind of asked my mom, was like, oh, how come Charles and I don't do that? I think that was kind of the beginning of my gradual realization how different Charles and I were. So I think from their perspective, it's very different. They're hyper aware of the differences between me and Charles. And, you know, for me, I grew up with that, so it was normal to me. So I completely understand that.
Also, I think it's so awesome that your parents are here, and hi to the Bliss parents. If at any point you guys, quick shout out, if at any point you guys want to add to this as well, like we're talking about the parent and sibling relationship. So if you feel comfortable, like you can use the chat box or drop something in there. Sorry if that embarrasses Nathan, but please feel free. But yeah, if anyone else also wanted to jump in. Hi, Nathan's mom.
I was wondering, with all of these findings overall, whether there have been differences between siblings who have only one autistic sibling versus siblings who additionally have at least one typically developed sibling or developing.
So there's some research on that that's kind of suggested that there's a little bit of a protective factor of having more siblings. Because when you're the only sibling, you know, if there is any, you know, I hate to say burden because I don't consider it a burden having a sibling with ASD, but if there is any sort of stress that comes with that, it's kind of all on you. And you don't really have another sibling, you know, typically developing sibling that you can go to kind of like, you know, talk that out or for that support. And so if there are more siblings, then there's potentially that opportunity to have, you know, that neurotypical sibling support around any issues that come up with your sibling with ASD.
Yeah, I think we're super lucky to also have you guys here to like clarify questions like that. I know we also had a question in the chat earlier. Julie, I don't know if you wanted to go over that for us. Catalina asked, have you done or heard of any research on the double empathy problem and sibling relationships? I know you put a answer in the chat box, but just in case anybody missed it, would you mind talking about it?
Yes, I have not really seen any research on that, although I haven't searched for that specifically, but I think it's sort of an interesting idea. And I mentioned in the chat, you know, it's something my brother and I talk a lot about, because I think that there is sort of this like reciprocal lack of understanding that we have of each other sometimes, right? You know, even though it's my profession to try to understand autism, there's still just times where he's sharing his perspective and I just like, it doesn't make sense to me. It's just not the way that my brain is wired. And obviously vice versa, he doesn't always understand the way that, you know, the neurotypical brain is wired. And so, yeah, I think that it's really interesting to think about that sort of, it goes both ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I could write a book on all the time I've spent trying to figure out what goes on in Ben's mind, like people have made movies about it and there can be many, many more made about it. But yeah, so unless anyone has anything else to add on that one, we can always pop back to other questions if I see that like one has more answers than the other. But for the siblings exhibited more positive than negative behaviors within the relationship, as well as more positive behaviors than their brother or sister with ASD, largely in domains of help and support. This is kind of funny because it's coming from such a like research oriented place that like, yeah, by whatever like measurements you had in this particular study, of course, we're going to be showing more like helpful things. It's the same thing that Einstein always said, like if you're going to measure a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it's not going to look like a very smart fish. And it's just like a very different way. Like the way that Ben supports me isn't in a way that we would even understand how to quantify, you know? And I think that's the fun thing about these studies is that it's coming from usually like the neurotypical perspective. And so we can't even quantify yet the ways that we're being supported by our sibling. And that's one of the shortcomings of the research and why it's really cool to have all of this panel of siblings that's like busy doing things like this, because it's so important to the people that don't necessarily have the opportunity to do research at Yale or Stanford or anywhere. And this one's super cool because like, I would say that Ben does lots of things in order to support me, but it's not something that would have shown up. So for example, like if I'm having a really bad day, Ben likes to so his main form of communication with me is through snippets of videos that he really likes. So whether he asks me to sing a certain portion of a song over and over and over again until I finally get it right, or if he shows me his favorite funny portion of a movie, that's what he brings over. But the thing is, he knows when I'm sad to bring over my favorite ones. And those are not the ones that he cares the most about. Like, he's seen Rango 4 million times. He really doesn't need to do any more watching of Rango. He's moved on at this point. But if I'm having a really bad day, he'll come and show me the golf swing from Rango or something like that. Like, it's to connect with me. And so I think that what we do as siblings is we realize that we can become a part of that autism bubble. And once you're in the bubble, it's so much easier to see like what your sibling is bringing to you as well, because their preferences can be very different from yours. And oftentimes they do recognize that. Like, Ben recognizes that I don't want to sing Frozen in Russian all the time, but he'll bring over something that I do like to do when I'm feeling sad. But yeah, are there any ways that like you can pick out, I guess, or try and explain how your siblings choose to reach you?
One thing that comes to my mind is, so when it says more positive behaviors than their brother or sister with ASD, my guess is that there were maybe examples of helping behaviors, or at the very least, it was looking at, which behaviors were actually done. But I think for me, my sister also makes me feel better a lot. And I can tell that she really wants to support me, and is kind of intending to be affectionate and to help me. And her intention, which I can easily sense, I think it matters more than whether the boxes are checked on which actions are done in this more consequences based way that it looks like the research is using. So I wonder whether, I'm not sure if it would be possible to measure what I'm talking about, like the extent to which siblings feel that their sibling supports them or wants to support them, versus how that actually plays out in terms of the autistic siblings' behaviors. Because I feel like the intention, at least to me, is more important.
Yeah, I think that right before Evie said something, I just wanted to pull that back to some of our like past research that we were talking about, how siblings have this like apparent higher level of empathy. And I think it's really, that level of empathy is really more tied to what Lauren was just saying of like, no, we just spend more time looking at like the nonverbal cues of siblings. And maybe that does make us more empathetic to what other people are saying without words as well. But yeah, Evie, please, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. I just really appreciate the way that you like articulated that it's like just honestly like unquantifiable, because like my brother Tommy is like not affectionate. Like he, like when you give him a hug, he does the like that, you know, where he's just kind of there, almost there. So it's like, how do I like explain to someone then like what it means when he calls me while I'm sitting in the library doing work to ask me if I watched Holes on Disney Plus, just to make sure that it wasn't a hacker? Like, how do you even like explain what that means to someone else? You know, it's just like one of those things. It's like you almost can't articulate the ways in which like the relationship like connects you to each other.
Yeah, please, Amy, hop in.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, just talking about like being a hugger or whatever. My brother is not a huge hugger either, which might look strange to people on the outside, but definitely like looking at the support side of things, like sometimes when he can tell when one of us is sad, he'll like come sit next to us and like give our hand a squeeze or something like that. So I think there's also this idea of like those little things are so special when you have someone with autism in your life, which might not be clear to people like on the outside. So I definitely think that that's a really cool thing about my brother.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I'm trying to explain to one of my friends, like, Ben sat with me through a whole movie. Like he sat on my couch, not my mom's couch, my couch. And like things like that, like it just doesn't carry to like a typically developing relationship, because they look at me like I'm actually crazy, which maybe I am, but it made me so incredibly happy at that moment that like I just needed to share it. And I think that also, if we expand that to the people that we bring into our lives, like if I think of my friends, I know I've talked about this before, but my mom used to always say that she knew which friends were going to stick around in my life just based on how well they could like hang out with Ben and how much joy that they also got from hanging out with my brother. Because I think that when other people see how every little thing that he does can change my whole day, Like if he comes over, he's recently started to mock my laugh, which is one of my favorite things on planet Earth, because it's also one of the markers that he has for making friends with other people. If you laugh from like your stomach, Ben loves you, loves you. If you have like a big smile and a big personality, like loves you already. And so for him to start mocking my laugh and to know that he's paying attention to it makes me so deeply happy, because it only happens when he's truly made me laugh like ridiculously about something. But being able to expand that joy to other people, like of course everyone on this panel like knows what I'm talking about. I don't even really have to tell you guys, you know exactly what I'm saying. But for the other people that might watch the recording, it's like, dang. So like that back and forth of just like maniacal laughter, that was a moment for them. Good for you. Not going to look the same as a typically developing relationship, but it's important to have those moments anyway, and like to celebrate them, because they're not going to show up in like every book that we read and every like moment on Instagram. Like, do you know how hard it is to get a picture with my brother on Instagram? I have the one picture that we use for this thing. One. The rest are from when I was like 12. Granted, we don't live together, but like it's hard to explain these things when you can't just be like, look, we're friends, I promise. So it's hard. But yeah, if anyone else wanted to jump in, or if we wanted to move to the next one, because we have like 15 minutes left now. So we also have some questions in the chat if we wanted to go over those out loud again. I know that I haven't really had a chance to read through them. If anyone that's been on the chat wants to summarize a little bit.
I was kind of reading, I was kind of reading too that there was a point made, and it was funny because as we were going through this whole research, I was thinking, I have a younger brother who's about 2 years younger than my middle brother, Georgie. So we've had very different experiences, I think. And as we were going through the research, I was thinking like, what would he say on if he was asked about his relationship? Because they were so close in age, and I mean, you know, boys are just, you know, I don't know why they're, you know, they're inherently different. And so I was always thinking about that kind of relationship, or how he views their relationship versus how I view the relationship. Because whereas like you guys were saying, you kind of take those little moments of our siblings like reaching out to us in their way. I don't know if he would necessarily view that the same as me. Like Sam, how you were giving an example of like he was mocking you and you knew that playfulness and you were like celebrating that. I don't know if like my brother would take the same viewpoint of Georgie interacting with me the same, like with him. He wouldn't interact either, because like since I was very young, I've always asked for hugs. You know, you just do that, and like he hasn't. You know, he's like, you know, the minute he was a teenager, he's like, oh, you know, hugs. Even from my mom, like, oh, God. So it's like, I don't know. It's an interesting. I think would be a really interesting thing to see how he would answer versus how I would answer, because it's definitely different.
Yeah. So I'm so sorry to do this to you, Nathan, but I think that Nathan is the closest we have to that type of relationship. He's also the only boy that we have on our panel right now, which is, I mean, he's holding down the fort, doing beautifully, I might add. But it's got to be difficult also being in these very female dominant spaces all the time, when this is often the only times that we get to have these types of conversations. Like I was saying in our very first webinar, this is the first time that I've actually been able to open up to a whole group of siblings. I've never spoken to this many siblings in my life. Like you guys are the aggregate of what I've done in terms of this whole space, just because it's never crossed my mind. But all of you are also women, so I know that you face a lot of the different challenges that I do. But for Nathan, he's also the younger sibling and he's a boy. So I'm really sorry, but I am putting you on the spot, Nathan, if you wouldn't mind.
No, I'm happy to say something on that. I think you're right, the disparity between like how guys and girls perceive and give affection, like I think that would be different in a typical developing sibling and a sibling on the spectrum. But I mean, I'm a big hugger in the first place, so I'll force Charles to give me hugs, you know, and but I agree. I think it would impact differently, like a sister, if Charles had a sister instead of a brother. I look at my other typically developing friends and their siblings, and, you know, like the brothers don't really show affection in the same way that I guess brothers and sisters might, or I guess the lack of affection might not affect them the same way, I guess. But you're right. Charles being older than me is different because I know normally you look up to that brotherly figure. But I've kind of taken that role reversal, I guess, and kind of been the older sibling for Charles, like taking care of him and trying to take responsibility in that way. And I think that's another interesting thing. It was a few slides back, but I think you'd reported one of the negative reports that Siblings had said was the burden of responsibility. And I mean, looking back now, it's easy for me to say, yeah, it taught me maturity at a young age. It taught me a lot of responsibility. But back then, that was a big burden on me. And it was stressful at the time too. You know, I felt like, oh, this is unfair. I shouldn't have to do all this extra work or whatever. And Charles would be in the hospital for a long time and my parents would be up there with him. So I'd be staying with my grandparents or staying with friends, families, or, you know, home alone, doing my homework and the dishes and stuff all by myself. Or, but I remember that was a big burden on me. So yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing that as well. It's not always easy to be like honest about the more negative sides of things because I mean, I think all of us have definitely gone through those times where my brother had to be taken to therapy. And so I was like alone at the house or I was with like my friends and things. And as a kid, you don't really recognize it as much. But looking back, I was like, dang, like it was kind of difficult at times to be the only one that was taking care of like all these different dynamics. So like I am an older sibling, which in this case, I guess is, I mean, I guess it's better for me because that burden comes with being an older sibling anyway. And so I was just born into that regardless. That was kind of just my lot. But I had to fill in a lot of the roles that my dad didn't necessarily get from having a son, you know, because Ben doesn't do the rough housing thing, you know, he's not going to necessarily go like throw a baseball outside all the time. So I ended up filling a little bit of both of those roles just because of like gender dynamics are still not something that has been evened out to the extent that most of us would prefer. And I think that we're all kind of on both sides of that. Like some of us benefit from that and some of us are definitely dealing with like the outcries from that because your relationship with your brother is different, not only because you generally wouldn't show that much emotion, but now those small moments that would usually mean even more in a male to male relationship, even those are going to look different too. And I think that I'm really glad that you are someone that gets to talk about things like that because I think it sets a really good example for other males that have siblings that might not necessarily feel as comfortable with talking about the emotional side of things because emotions are difficult and they're really hard to quantify and not everybody gets to like break them down into numbers or talk about them in like a very distanced type of way. But yeah, so thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing on that quickly. I think I've been around a lot of siblings, like through the Phelan McDermott Syndrome Foundation and another foundation that we did research with. And I like sat down with a bunch of these siblings one time, and I noticed a lot more of the younger girls and siblings were taking a more proactive approach to wanting to go into medicine and wanting to go into care or therapy, things like that. And I saw less of the brothers wanting to take that role. And I don't know, it was a small group, so I don't know how representative it was, but I think that's probably a common recurrent theme, I guess. So it's another interesting thing to note.
Yeah, it's super cool. And it was something that was actually brought up in some of the previous research we were talking about, but it's one of those areas that just isn't explored enough because, I mean, our whole field is so new. We've come so far in like the last 50 years, we've come so far in the last 20 years of just like my family's experience with autism. And I mean, there's a lot of hope in that as well. So especially with all of us graduating in the next 5 to 10 years. So that'll be good. But yeah, I think we're on the siblings reported increased demand for sibling help and support of their brother or sister with autism, but also reported appreciation for their brothers and sisters. I do think that we've started to touch on this, but if anyone wanted to like jump in on that as well, like we were talking a little bit about how sometimes role reversal is what's needed and sometimes just understanding that like, yeah, my brother does need therapy and I probably don't. Like, I don't need speech therapy, at least. I might need other therapies, but that's a different conversation altogether. But having like that relationship of understanding, like, yeah, his needs are going to be met in different ways, the same way that like I can meet my own needs. Like I can make breakfast for myself and I can chuck on another egg for Ben as well, you know? I think that I don't really feel qualified to talk about this, honestly, because it's the only thing I've ever done, you know? Like, I don't know anything different than caring for Ben because he's been in my life since I was 3. I think my parents would probably have a very different perspective on like how much attention it requires to have a child on the spectrum versus like a neurotypical child. But yeah, in terms of needing more help and support, it's just always been straightforward for me. Does anyone have a different experience or want to talk to that as well?
I can say something as one of the other like only like younger siblings here. It's like very interesting experience because as much as Tommy would probably get mad at me for saying it, like I do feel like the older sibling, and like we're only 18 months apart, so we're very close in age already, but I just always feel like the older sibling. But like I don't know if you guys have this same experience, but it's like very difficult to articulate. But like all throughout like high school and like even in college, there was always just the like need of like, okay, I have to be responsible. I have to get good grades. I can't get in trouble. Like this is just the requirements of my life. There are no other options for me because there's so much else going on. But like, you know, like Sam was saying, like the stuff that I do for my brother is just a fact of life. I would say that honestly, some of the like, I guess, friction around like responsibility occurs more in my relationship with my parents than in my relationship with my sibling because that's already so naturalized, you know? So that's what I would have to say about that.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point as well, because I think that does cause friction in my relationship with my parents. And I hadn't even really thought about it, was that the way that I treat my brother is very much as a brother and not necessarily as like a porcelain doll. And my mother would very much prefer to wrap him in bubble wrap, as any mother would like to do with their child. And so in any of those like friction situations, it's me basically telling my mom, like, he can really do this himself. You're just pampering him. She's like, just let me baby him. I'm like, okay, yes, if that's what you need. But the boy, as long as you're aware that he's duping you and he totally can feed himself at this point, he's 18 years old and I've seen him do it because I refuse to. And so it's just those little moments of like, he's so clever in just manipulating the situation to get what he wants because he's a boy. He's just a teenage boy. And that's what, like, I did the same thing too. That's why I can recognize it, because he's my brother. I know this kid. And so it's like moments like that that you understand, like, yes, I understand that you want to baby him. He's our pride and joy. I know. But please understand that he's also just my brother and I'm going to be mad at him sometimes. But yeah, so just for the sake of time, we have like a couple minutes left and we can just get through this last one, which was the children with ASD were reported to exhibit more aggressive behaviors within the sibling relationship than typically developing siblings. In my relationship with my brother, I'm very lucky in that his aggressive, well, I don't know if lucky is really the term, but his aggressive tendencies aren't really directed outwards all that often unless he just cannot find the words to say something. And he's tried so many times that he's just like, I can't believe you're not getting this. And then every now and then I get a smack. And so like, that's not ideal. I think that my mom definitely deals with more of this, and I'll get her on a panel so she can talk about her experience as well, because she's been the one that absorbs a lot of the negative sides of things because she loves to be that fix-it person for everyone. And I think that most families have this type of dynamic for at least one member of the family being the fix-it. And so she's absorbed a lot of that, like the meltdowns, anytime he's being aggressive, anytime that like something could turn negative, my mom is already on top of that. And it's difficult because it's exactly the opposite of what Megan is talking about, in that you definitely want to, as a family, take on this problem together, but it's really hard because each one of us wants to protect everyone else in the family as well. So anytime that I'm the one that's there for the aggressive behavior, I'm going to try and shield that from the rest of the family. And my mom does the same, and my dad does the same. And it's a very much like, this should be contained type of thing, as opposed to opening it up and making it almost everyone's problem. I don't know if anyone else has also dealt with this. I know we've spoken a little bit about just those feelings of responsibility and those family dynamics before, but if you felt comfortable sharing, please do.
Yeah, I think so. Something that comes to mind that definitely was illustrated by what you just said about different members of the family trying to help each other kind of contain it and like take more of the burden. I just think that when someone with autism is aggressive towards a sibling or another family member, it's just a totally different intention probably by them, or at least in my personal experience, than the intention that I would think if a typically developing sibling did that to another typically developing sibling. And yeah, I mean, I would imagine that when someone without autism is aggressive towards a sibling or towards a parent, everyone thinks that they intended to do that, and isn't kind of trying to contain it. Whereas in my experience, it feels more like when my sister has been aggressive in the past, it's been, yeah, I guess the feeling is that she is trying to express something and is like having a lot of trouble and can't really control what she's doing, or at least doesn't mean to hurt people. So everyone is kind of trying to help her and help each other at the same time. So yeah, I would probably classify it more as different than as more or less, even if in fact there are more aggressive behaviors in relationships where one person has autism than in typically developing ones.
Yeah, I think that brings up the really, really strong point also of just like, if we're ever measuring our relationship against like a neurotypically developing relationship, there's going to be very different markers for what like I would even consider to be an aggressive behavior versus what a neurotypical sibling would consider an aggressive behavior. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just an autism specific problem. This happens with people across any type of disability and any type of like mental health problem and things like that. You're going to be changing your thresholds all the time. And what outside people call resilience, we call normalizing. And so I think it's important to recognize them as both of those things. Like what we consider to be normal is actually an act of resilience, and what other people consider to be an act of resilience and like, oh my gosh, you're so strong, is really just what we consider to be normal. Before we run out of time, I did want to just address one of the questions in the chat, which was adorably worded. Thank you, Nathan's mom. She was saying that as all you wonderful young people become more independent and start your own adult lives, do you have any ideas about how you will continue to nurture your relationship with your sibling, especially if they aren't really able to communicate on the phone/Zoom? That's maybe going to take a second for people to think about. In my case, we've been really lucky in that my dad has always been traveling. Obviously, my dad is a golfer. For anyone that didn't put that connection together, that's where the whole Els for Autism Foundation comes from. He plays golf. He's really good at it. And so in that sense, he traveled so much that we were always kind of growing up, like as soon as Skype came out, we were on that. And that's old. And so anything that had like a video component or calling, my brother and I were indoctrinated into like using technology to keep our family connected. We didn't really have another choice. And I'm really thankful that we got on that as early as we did, considering now I sit in front of a screen watching Zoom for 6 hours a day. So it's good to have some practice in that sense. But I'm really lucky that Ben, I mean, obviously there's days when Ben does not care. He does not want to look at a phone. He's over it. He doesn't really care what I'm doing every day, and that's totally fine. I think most siblings are like that. And in our case, like sometimes now when I'll call him, I'll call to my mom's phone because Ben doesn't have his own phone, but Ben watches videos on there and he's learned what my name looks like, which is super cool. And now we'll answer it and be like, mom, mom, mom. He won't talk to me. He'll just say mom until my mom comes over, starts the FaceTime, and then he'll talk to me. So yeah, that's in my case, I'm super lucky, but I don't actually know what other people are doing right now. And I'm super interested in it as well. It's a really good question.
As I mentioned earlier, every time I watch something on Disney Plus, the next day I receive a phone call from Tom asking me if I watched it, which is like, I guess a little bit of a weird way to communicate with your siblings, but it's just like the way he checks in with me, you know, and then he'll sometimes text me other stuff just like randomly about like, sometimes I think one time he called me to like talk to me about something else, but he really just wanted to tell me how well he was doing in his biology class. So there was like a pause and he was like, so I'm doing well in biology. And I was like, okay, here we go. Just stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely like the updates you receive, probably not going to be like, hey, yeah, I did this cool thing and I met this person. No, it's going to be like, okay, so I watched this movie, or are you a hacker, or are you my sister? Like, did you watch, like, yeah, the updates we receive are very different as well. Like, I just kind of hear the one that I get most often is if my brother went to golf with the boys, which means that my dad took him to practice with him, which is adorable because my brother loves to now interact with the boys, which don't tell anyone. This is where he learns all the swear words. Do not come at me and my mom if he tells you to F off when he first meets you. It's not on us. It just happens. But so it's just moments like that, like the things that I would usually tell my parents of like, yeah, I did this thing and I went to this place and I was with these people. Like, that's not the way that Ben frames the world. He frames the world in whether or not he went on the golf course and whether or not he like saw the boys, which I guess could just be a typical male thing that I'm missing out on, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I think too, just I was thinking about this as well, because I think sometimes even my own family will sometimes forget that my brother, he really can, like, I think it's about including too, my brother in different moments of our lives. And this past week, we talked about doing Secret Santa with my extended family, and my cousin, it totally innocently kind of didn't include him in the list. And I was like, he can totally do this. Like, I will help him do Secret Santa. And they're like, okay, well, like he, like, how's he going to choose the gift? Like, I was like, oh no, I've got my job. I was made for this, visual supports. I'm like, this is what I do. So I was like, he can totally participate. And so I got some pushback from my mom because she was like, well, do you think he'd really like? And I'm like, I really think and doesn't matter. Like, I mean, I think he's going to enjoy participating with us, even if he's not on the Zoom call when everybody opens their presents. If he's on the phone with me, or if my mom's on the phone with me, he might not be talking directly to me, but I know because you've told me he's got a smile on his face. So I think I know that in the future, I've always just had this idea that despite, what my parents think he would enjoy, or like he's going to have an active role in something, in the important points of my life. And like I said, he doesn't talk on the phone to me. He might answer them like, hi, Amanda, bye, I love you. But it's because my mom's right there. But I still call, and I still, will, even if he's doesn't want to say anything, I'll say, just hold the phone to his ear so he can, hear my voice and, something. So I think I think that I just try to make a really conscious effort that when I'm doing something exciting, he's also going to be right there with me,
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I think that's also, it's one of the harder parts because it doesn't come as naturally to just think of like, oh yeah, like if I'm going to go to the beach today, like it took me until high school to realize that I can just put my brother in the car and take him with me. Like, I might not be there for as long as I intended. I might not get to like lay down on the beach and read a book like I was planning on doing, but I can take my brother to the beach. Like, and now that I'm 21 and technically an adult in like many legal senses, I just have this ability to like just take him with me places, which I just didn't feel authorized to do when I was living at home for some reason. But now that I'm like a fully fledged adult and I can cook or something, I mean, like driving does not count you as an adult, I might add. I was 15 when I learned how to drive. It's not cutting it. But cooking, on the other hand, if I can make us both a meal, I can watch us for a weekend. And so now it's like, I get to do all these things that I didn't even think of before in a certain sense, which makes me feel really bad because it makes me feel like a not empathetic sibling and that I'm like exclusionary, maybe, I don't know, might have made up a word, but it's not always the most natural thing to bring your brother into a situation where he might not excel. And it's almost like I want to protect him from those situations instead of letting him live the same way that any other sibling would. Like, he has to make his own mistakes as well. And it's hard to accept that because I have a very parental love for my brother. Because I've like, if you have to change someone's diapers or help them go to the bathroom, like you're real close forever after that point. And yeah, it's just hard to remember that like he's a capable human being that I have to like let do things too. Wow, I sound old, to be fair. Also, I don't want to go too much overtime. I don't know, Alicia, if we have more time, we could talk for literal hours. But if anyone has anything else to add to this before we get cut off, I know some people have like classes and meetings and such, but it's always so lovely to see all of you. And I'm so happy to have our new panelists, Amy and Lauren, on here. And it's always a pleasure.